Alrighty, what is happening? It's Tuesday night, people, and tonight we're going to rate the best deadlift accessories. So, to give you a breakdown, who am I? Why should you care? If you don't know me, my name is Steve Coyne. I am a 80-kilo strongman competitor. I have a best deadlift of 725 pounds at a 176-pound body weight. So I have successfully pulled over 4 times my body weight, pulled over 700 5 times as a lightweight athlete. Did 725 for 2 in the gym. Done 700 raw. So I am really trying to help people out and understand what it takes to build up the deadlift, because it is the king of the lifts. Whether you're in powerlifting, strongman, and even like if you're in CrossFit, having a really big deadlift is just going to serve you for everything else that you do, right? All of these sports are very posterior chain driven. So if you have a weak deadlift, that means you are lacking in every other event. It could be sandbag carries, atlas stones, yoke carries, and then you can also develop more power on things like your log and axle presses by having a really good, strong foundational backside with your deadlifts, okay? So we're going to kind of break down some of the best deadlift accessories and a little bit more about them. So let's just start from like a approach of areas and positions, right? So when we're breaking down the deadlift, we start on the floor. Deadlift, you're lifting dead weight up off the floor. So talking about off the floor accessories, right? The number one is deficit deadlifts, okay? Easy, hands down. And what is a deficit deadlift? That's very simple. It is just putting yourself on an elevated platform so that we're now higher to the bar than where we normally are, right? So a deadlift bar with 45-pound plates sits at 9 inches off the floor. So we're now getting to a position where relative to where our feet are, the bar is now 7 inches. So I usually like to prescribe these to people with a like 2-inch, maybe 2.25-inch lift, because that's what a lot of like 45-pound bumper plates, if you've got those big, thick rogue ones. But what this does is it trains our body to be quickly moving in motion at the point where we're normally stuck on the floor. So it's really good to switch up, when you're always pulling from that dead, stopped, isolated position with dead weight. Now you're training your body to be moving quickly in that same spot. So you just naturally will be able to produce more force at that position, right? So deficit deadlifts are really great for that. But breaking this down a little further, what we're really looking to do with off the floor pulling is to actually engage our quads and our leg drive. So even though this is a posterior chain movement, it's a full body movement, just posterior train driven. So we want to use our legs in a deficit deadlift. So we want to make sure that we are in this position where the bar is always over our mid foot. But now in order to reach down and grab it, you're just going to have to visualize, because I can't really move my screen up and down. You're actually going to need more of a knee bend than normal. So if this is where, right, your deadlift was, you're actually going to squat down and start with a slightly higher chest, slightly bigger knee bend to center yourself with the weight, engage your quads. But then by the time you move up into position, those just couple of inches where you're normally in position for a off the floor deadlift, you'll be in the same hinge, okay? So with this note, something to understand is that since we're trying to engage our legs and recruit more leg drive out of it, my favorite personal, so number one is the best because most people relate to that really well, but my personal favorite one is this with a trap bar, okay? A deficit trap bar deadlift. And this is because it just helps people kind of think very straightforward, or actually like think less about the movement and engage their quads from a very low position. So when we're using a trap bar, it's taking a lot of the weight out of our low back, out of our glutes, out of our hamstrings, and putting it all into our quads. So if we train this for a couple of blocks, this will teach us how to really blast hard with our legs, because normally when we're training quads, it's from a squat type pattern or a lunge. So there's always a start with an eccentric, okay? So that just means you're sinking into it, right? A squat, we're dropping into it and then coming back up. So we have some elasticity of our muscles that helps us rebound when we're building our quads. But trap bar deficit deadlifts work really well because not only is it dead weight off the floor, but it's just training the quad muscles in ways that they're not normally trained, right? Quad muscles usually are not trained from a dead stop, which is going to take me to number 3, one that is not used very often, but I think should be used more. And this is, believe it or not, a leg press, okay? Now, leg presses are an awesome tool for leg strength, but they're actually really, really good specifically for the deadlift, because again, let's think about what our purpose is. We're moving weight from a standstill. So when you do a deadlift correct, right, you're setting up, we're going to brace and get the slack and get the tension out of the barbell. This is, again, when we do this perfect, so we have tucked our lats, our chest is up, our shoulders are packed back, everything is tight with the weight, our chin is tucked, our lower back's engaged, our core is engaged, and then our legs are nice and tight. So full chain, head to toe, tight strength. Really what you want to do off of that point is just try to leg press through the ground to get it moving. So that only really works though if you're already very tight and braced through the whole system, because if you're not, one of these things are going to happen. Either your hamstrings and butt will shoot up, or you'll start getting that like rounded back. And this kind of comes back into the equation of when you're choosing what accessories that you should use and why you should use them. Like, what is the weak link in the chain? We're still kind of covering off the floor. So as we're going through these, kind of assume that, this is no other problems, or this is problem A1 rather, right? Like you're able to maintain a good neutral spine. Your hips aren't shooting up early. You just cannot move it off the floor. So, as I said, a good deadlift, when performed correctly, you brace yourself and get really, really tight, and then you just essentially perform a leg press, okay? That is how you initiate a deadlift when done correctly. So we can use the leg press machine itself with our feet in our deadlift stance to bring it down into a dead stop and just rocket the weights. And this can be really successful in like a power variation because, deadlifts are so intense, full body, head to toe. When we are just in our leg press, which is really just isolating, everything from our hips down. It's not even using hip extension. It's just like our legs, top of our thighs down. It has so much less of a nervous system effect on our whole body. So we can do a lot of volume. We can do a lot of power. We can do a lot of explosive pushing on a leg press because of this, okay? So those are going to kind of be my top 3 for off the floor speed. But then like what happens, right, positionally, if we are now good at getting it up off the floor, but we get it stuck somewhere like mid-thigh, mid-shin. I think my deficit deadlift is stronger than my conventional. Is that possible? You are doing something wrong if that's the case, honestly. I can't say, I don't know, but that should not be the case. Fix it. Something's off. You're probably, guys, I'm just talking to this video, but I have a question in the live. It says, my deficit deadlift might be stronger than my conventional. Is that possible? So there's got to be something with your setup where it is more correct in a deficit deadlift than a like normal standard conventional off the floor deadlift. So feel free to shoot me over some videos if you have that, but that absolutely should not be the case. It is possible, but that just means something's wrong somewhere, okay? All right, so moving from off the floor to midpoint, okay? Okay. Now, we got to be careful at some of these deadlift accessories because our goal is to always be moving fast with weights. We want to be strong while we move quickly. So we're going to talk about isometrics, but just remember what our overall purpose is. So I'm going to give, let's just say, mid knee. All right, mid knee is where we stop. The first favorite of mine is overcoming isometrics. Okay, overcoming iso. Okay, and why overcoming isometrics? Or what is that rather? So an isometric is a muscle contraction where your muscles are neither lengthening nor shortening. All right, easiest example is the bicep. Right, as your muscles like come together, they shorten up, they tighten up. As I extend my arm, they lengthen. Right, but if I were just to come here and just hold really tight, they're still flexed and tense, but they are not moving. They're not shortening or lengthening. So isometrics are actually the strongest type of muscle contraction compared to eccentrics, which are second strongest, and then concentrics are actually weaker. So this is why you can lower more weight than you can press, right? It's because like the eccentric this way, as your muscle lengthens, like on a bench press, is a stronger contraction than when you're pressing and it shortens up. But again, that isometric is stronger. If you just had to get something out and just hold it in place, you can hold more weight in place than you can move it either direction. So in order to get our body used to handling weight in any capacity, we can use isometric contractions. But the key is that it has to be partnered up with another movement that engages your speed and keeps you able to move with it. So if we had a sticking point mid-knee, what we would do is set this in a rack to where you're coming and pulling just before that sticking point. And we're going to pull against the rack, like we're trying to rip it up off the floor, pull against it as hard as we can for like 2 to 3 seconds, like a really very short amount of time, just to get those super intense, strong contractions. And now be warned, because this is a very nervous system demanding movement. So when you're doing this, you really need to limit this to 2 to 3 total sets of like 1 rep when you're doing it, and then even use it sparingly. So like for a 3-week block, or do it 1 week on, 1 week off, so you're not totally frying your nervous system. So we were doing overcoming isometric, pulling against the rack. So we're pulling against it as hard as we can. 3, 2, 1. Relax, and then we're going to take a short break and follow it up with a light explosive deadlift, because we're combining then our goals of I'm handling a lot of weight and producing a lot of force exactly at the spot where I need my body to start kicking in, and also still maintaining the ability to move with integrity and speed and power through the entire range of motion. So we should not just be developing force in one area. We have to be able to apply that force through the full range of motion, okay? So that's an overcoming isometric. Our second one is like a 1 1/4 deadlift. So this is similar, but if you don't have a rack to set up your isometrics and you're overcoming isometrics, then we're just going to do a floating or a halting isometrics. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. Let's say you have that like sticking point mid-knee again. You would deadlift up to that point, just hold in place, make sure that your back is flat, you're in your proper deadlift position for 3, 2, 1, drop back down to the ground, and then come right back up. So we're doing this same isometric pattern, but in a different way. So pretty simple. And then third, finally, is a block pull, okay? Block pull is where the weights themselves are elevated and not just the barbell, right? This is not a rack pull. We want to be pretty specific about that. So weights are elevated, not the bar, because when the bar is elevated in a rack pull, the tension is already broken in the barbell. All that slack is already out, and that's one of the hardest things that we have to train to overcome as strength athletes. So weights on the block, and we want to set this again below where our sticking point is, because we want to like have our body like fire into explosive horsepower before we hit that sticking point, so we can just have the speed and the strength and the force to blast right through it. So top 3, overcoming isometrics. If you do not have access to a rack, 1 1/4 deadlift. And then number 3 is a block pull, okay? Now, just remember, these are kind of like performance-based accessories, right? These are all performance-based. So we're not really thinking about like weak links in the chain all the way, although they are exposed with things like this. So, right, off the floor speed could be entirely quad leg drive weakness, okay? Midpoint could be entirely low back weakness. So when we're talking about these things, we're kind of in this just current video and discussion, framing them as if our technique was good and we're just like not able to fire and wire in certain places. So we'll kind of circle back to that, but just for like theory and understanding, that's what we're talking about. So now what happens if you can't lock out, okay? Okay, so a really good one out the gate, and this is not my own, but I just want to mention it because this is something the Australian strength coach, Sebastian Oreb, put out online not too long ago. He basically says, like, you know, the faster you are off the floor, the easier your lockout's going to be. So he was saying you could just get faster off the floor so you're not fighting it as much at your lockout as a, you know, just way to think about things. But it's not always that simple because it could be a strength issue, right? One good one here is not a deadlift variation, but it's actually going to be hip thrusts. And specifically, I like banded hip thrusts. Why? Because, right, when we're doing a deadlift, we're coming up, the muscles we use to finish this are our glutes to extend. Boom, right? Like our quads are pretty much out of the equation. We're using those hinge muscles, our hamstrings, our butt, our low back, but primarily our butt to finish this. Now, again, this is full body, so there's always a lot of things firing at once, but you can kind of think of this as off the ground is a lot more quads, you know, mid-range motion is a lot more hamstrings and low back, and then finishing the movement is glutes, and it's actually a lot of upper back at the same time. But as far as like our mechanics, glutes are really what's taking a lot of the load. So when we do banded hip thrusts, what's happening is we train our hips to accelerate through a hip extension, right? So think about this, right? If we're always trying to move with speed and power, you know, if we're doing a hip thrust on the floor on a hip thrust bench and we have to accelerate into that lockout on our hip thrust, then we're training our body to do the same thing, to not slow down as the bar goes up, but instead speed up. So this is, you know, this is really like kind of the secret weapon, if you want to call it that. Out of everything I've given you so far, like this is so underrated, I cannot even tell you. So these live videos don't get like a whole bunch of views, but if you're watching this, like this is insanely good. This is like the best one there is if you can do it, all right? But what's also really good about hip thrusts is when they're banded, is with bands, you can actually like ramp up a whole lot of tension and not totally fry your nervous system, because those like straight weights, if we're doing barbells, just has a greater nervous system effect on you versus when it's just bands and band tension. So number one, banded hip thrusts. Number two, believe it or not, I'm actually going to say throwing, right? So like sandbag throws, D-ball throws, and if you can't do that, like violent American kettlebell swing. So I'm just going to say SB throws. So anything where we're having to, you know, kind of scoop and then boom, violently launch through is something that's really going to help you like activate the muscles to that hip extension to just wake up, right? Really, really incredible stuff. And that's just more of, again, like trying to figure out how to turn these things on so you can pull all the way through here with strength. And now, finally, this is actually kind of an obscure one. What I kind of want you to think of the way I view deadlifts is that lockout is actually one of the easier kind of positions, right? Because you have to be strong in your body head to toe in order to get off the floor. Keep taking it through midpoint. So like I just feel like lockouts for most people tend to kind of come automatically if you're strong enough. At least they should, right? Block pulls are something that also are kind of could work two things at the same time. You know, if your block pull, like let's say your sticking point is somewhere like mid-thigh, like all you got to take it from is here to here. So you're working that sticking point and your lockout like 2 in 1. Kind of same thing with a lot of these midpoint accessories is like we're not really working a huge range of motion once we start tacking on these like midpoint exercises. So your lockout's going to, like by secondary effect, get worked too. So we have like banded hip thrusts, sandbag throws, like for explosive power. And then third one is unconventional. Is a cable crunch. Now, why a cable crunch? Okay, and I like these real heavy. So what happens a lot of times when we're getting close to our lockout, I mentioned very briefly, like as we work up the chain, off the floor is a lot more like legs, midpoint is a lot more like hamstrings and low back, and then our lockout is like glutes and upper back. Why is that? So, you know, you're now at this point, your upper back has been holding the weight for a long time here. So a lot of people get stuck with their lockout when their upper back loses it here, and it just takes them out of position. So what actually happens here is, you know, when you round over and aren't like this, when you don't have that neutral spine, you're now sitting more behind the weight. So you're having to like maybe like ramp up and lose position. So if you have to do that, right, then you're just kind of throwing your weight forward, your quads are going out, and you don't have any room to extend at your hips this way. So we really want to make sure that our upper back is super strong, but so is our core, okay? Now, why cable crunches are written here is because a lot of people already have a pretty good upper back system in there, right? They already have good upper back strength, but they lose it because of their core. So we want to kind of train where we might be in compromised positions so we can be strong in them once we're working up to heavy weights. So with a cable crunch, right, you know, we want to find that like hinge here, or we say like knobs, like you got horns here, and train like a cat-cow. So big crunch in, and then just up, okay? So a lot of spinal flexion, extension. So what this is going to do for you is if you happen to like lose your positioning on a deadlift, let's say you're coming up here, and then you lose that, is it's actually going to keep like the rest of your chain real strong. So if we were doing these cable crunches where we're strong in this position and like connecting to our backside, our arms, our lats, all that stuff at the same time, you know, we'll be strong in our lats, back, shoulders, traps as we get into extension. So that's like kind of one of the big things. It's like when the back rounds, it's not always like your upper back that's losing it. It could be the front side. You know, we have to think like forward, back. There's all these pieces in the chain. So it might not just be, you know, that you're like lats and back and your traps aren't strong enough. It could be that your like core wasn't able to hold it. So you went from here, and then you just like collapsed in. So that's why I'm saying cable crunches. So these are kind of like for each positional thing, my favorites, and I have like some others too, but just kind of thinking of like the best ones. I mean, we can go on and on and on and on and on and on and on about this, but this is all positional. And again, assuming that like your technique was already pretty good, like what are you going to do? If you can hold your position like really, really well on an or through a deadlift, but you just can't move it off the floor, deficit deadlifts, trap bar deficits, and that leg press is going to be your best friend. We have these midpoint sticking points, the overcoming isometrics, 1 1/4 isometric deadlifts and block pulls, and then lockouts, the banded hip thrusts, any sort of throws, and then cable crunches. So there's really a lot of different ways to attack these things, And then what's really important too is to not just view deadlift as like, I'm going in on my deadlift day and that's it. You have to like think about how the rest of your program all is a puzzle piece together for one grand goal. Now that could be like deadlift specific, right? So if you were going to deadlift, you should still, in order to have a balanced system, do some sort of pressing, some rows, and definitely some legs. This is not deadlifting, but just for example, Julius Maddox, who's the bench king, he still deadlifts and squats 90% of the year because it is important to have a head to toe full body strong system in order to pull your most or just to push your most in his instance. So you have to think about like, all right, so what leg exercises are complementing my deadlift? This is why, like, if deadlift was your goal, deadlift only was your goal, you might consider, training more of a low bar back squat style, like if that's what you wanted to do. But if you have like a safety bar and you could train some Hatfields where you're holding onto the rack and you're mimicking, your deadlift stance and your back position to a deadlift, so you're strengthening your legs and your upper back on your secondary day with that leg focus in order to complement your deadlift. So there's like all sorts of different ways that we can go about this, but your deadlift day shouldn't be like a standalone. But there should also only be one of those, right? When we're doing this right, we're going to be putting a lot of like nervous system activation into it. Deadlifts, as I've said several times already, and as you should know, very, very demanding to the nervous system. So you should really only be deadlifting once a week when you're getting heavy. Now, there are some programs, this like daily undulating periodization, that sort of style, where you could deadlift a couple times a week. But like, I don't really want to get into that. But just know when you do that, that's like using like a 80 to 90% day and then like a 50% day with very specific volume calculations. But that's not what this video is about. So, all right, guys. So those are my top deadlift accessories. Here's the deal. If your deadlift is not competitive, you're leaving so many points off the table. Deadlift is one of those lifts that has greater carryover to all other things that you're going to do. So if you are a strongman and is not even deadlifting 600 or barely over 600, like that's not going to cut it, unfortunately. So you just have to remember that. That's all I got for you. So stay strong. Get your deadlift up. Boom. If I can deadlift 4 times my body weight, you can sure as hell go at least 3 times your body weight. I'm like really thinking about all these things. I keep posting these strength standards on my Instagram. You as a strength athlete need to be deadlifting minimum 3 times your body weight for a man. And minimum, I should say, if you want to be competitive, it's really like 2.5 times your body weight for a woman, right? Now, that's just the minimums. Anything is better, but you got to do it in order to be as successful as possible. So, all right, guys, that was an awesome video tonight. I hope you appreciate it. I'm going to get running on you. As always, got free programs, lots of other cool stuff, technique tutorials, a full-ass deadlift course, and a 100-page ebook on deadlifting that covers everything that I talked here, and then so much more in so much detail. It's called Deadlift Domination. It's all in clubstrongman.com. Clubstrongman.com. Ready? If you cannot read or you cannot understand what I'm saying, check this out, right? In the club. Club Strongman. It is the #1 private online strongman community by a strength athlete. It's been through it all, but we got a lot of awesome people in there, so some good discussions going. If you ever need help with anything, hit me up on my Instagram at StephenMCoin. It's the same as my YouTube here. Boom. Stay strong, y'all. Have a championship night.